Welcome to the Anacortes City Council meeting of January 8th, 2024. I'd like to call the council meeting to order. Mr. Hoagland, would you take the roll, please?
Mr. Fantini.
Here.
Mr. Young.
Here.
Mr. Walters.
Here.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Here.
Ms. Moulton.
Here.
Mr. McDougall.
Here.
Ms. Hubick.
Here.
Would you please join me in the pledge? Okay, item 3, announcements and committee reports. Just a couple of quick announcements. Monday, the City of Anacortes office will be closed. Monday, the 15th of January, in recognition of Martin Luther King Day. There will be no garbage service on Monday. Monday and Tuesday customers will be collected on Tuesday, January 16th. Many of you already know the Guimas Car Ferry has been out of service since last week. That's operated by Skagit County. It's passenger-only service. They're hoping they might have it back in service tomorrow, but we're waiting on that information. Also, our mild December is probably going to end this week with the forecast for well below freezing temperatures and possible precipitation. So please pay attention to that coming up. All right, right into committee reports. Housing, Affordability, and Community Service Committee.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yeah, so it was Ms. Moulton, myself, and staff. We had it on January 3rd and really discussed kind of what goals we had for 2023 and what we'd accomplished this last year, and then what our new goals would be for 2024. So a couple of things just to talk about the things we have accomplished is a parking ordinance we got done, addressing personal property in the right-of-way, a utility bill discount for those in need. We also had some things that are going to either come again for 2024 or possibly be addressed by the work that the county is doing with the North Star project, such as permanent funding for an extreme cold or hot weather shelter. We talked about last year trying to acquire a motel. That didn't really pan out, so we need to continue to work with our service providers such as Salvation Army and Family Center to figure out a more permanent solution. We also talked about the fact that we need to work on an affordable housing strategic plan update. And then some of our new goals is to create a matrix of services so that folks, not only folks who, community members, but also just different organizations know where services are available, and we've got staff working on that now, so we appreciate that. And then also we need to do a code update to provide a definition for community services. We don't have that, and we need to have that for various applications. And the community services would include, what zone that would be in, kind of the showers, laundry, day facilities, community and human services, and articulate what would fall under that. More discussion about the multifamily tax exemption, which is available by the state, and it has been somewhat of a discussion, but needs to be further discussed this next year. Continue to implement our housing action plan. We had some of the low-hanging fruit go to Planning Commission, and I think it'll probably come to City Council shortly. And what other things? And then talked about Sharp's Corner. We've got $25,000 for a sub-area plan, and that's going to really include a land capacity analysis, and then also a look at holistically what that property could be used to its best purpose, which is right now, countywide and statewide is probably housing, but how do we make that housing desirable, not just for low income, but also for a variety of housing income levels, and what other kind of supportive things we'd want to see there, whether it's grocery stores or daycare facilities or gardens or connection to the community forest lands and whatnot. So that's pretty much what we discussed, and I think there's some more to work on, but we will continue our HACS meetings.
Great, thank you. Next up is Planning Committee.
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Moulton.
thank you. The Planning Committee met at 5 o'clock today, and council members Cleland, McGrath, Walters, and myself, with planning staff John Coleman, our director, and senior planner Libby Grage. And we are revisiting the moratorium on short-term rentals in the commercial business, central business district, the MMU, and the commercial marine zones. And that moratorium has been in place to prohibit new short-term rentals. And that moratorium ends on March 27th. So Ms. Grage brought us a draft of how we will propose to move forward with that. That will go first to the Planning Commission, probably end of this month, beginning of February. And basically, it's going to continue to prohibit new short-term rentals of entire dwelling units, and then potentially allow short-term rentals of up to 2 or 3 rooms in a dwelling unit when the owner or long-term resident actually resides there as their primary residence. So people wouldn't be able to rent out an entire house. But if you live there, you could rent out up to 3 rooms. And establish definitions and require city business license. And also this will address existing non-conforming short-term rentals that don't have licenses and are already in existence. So that will be gone into in more detail than I will go here. And we'll also figure out the enforcement of these regulations. Then we also talked about the population allocations that are coming from the state for growth between 2022 and 2045 for Skagit County. And those are still in the draft stage, but roughly based on Anacortes' growth pattern over the past 20 years, we're thinking we will be assigned about 5,000 people between now and 2045. Which means almost 3,000 units would need to be built or ideally would be built to accommodate those people, which means 147 per year. And in our really good years, we've had about 100, but the past couple of years, that number has really taken a nosedive. So anyway, not that we have to be totally on track for that right now, but we'll be thinking ahead, and we will have more definitive information soon. Thanks.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
One add-on to Ms. Moulton's report. While she summarized the staff recommendation, our consensus recommendation of the committee on short-term rentals is to address only the commercial areas right now, deal with the moratorium, and then circle back and talk about what we might do in the residential areas.
Great, thank you. Next up is, Planning Commission appointments. First of all, I would like to thank 2 long-serving planning commissioners, Warden McKenzie and Jeff Graff. Maybe somebody could pass along to Mr. McKenzie the thanks for that service, because I appreciate the contributions of these volunteers and their willingness to serve our community. So with that, though, I would like to present council for their consideration and confirmation. Luke Courier for an appointment to 6-year term through December 2029, and Mike Mills for another 6-year term as well. And Mr. Mills, if you want to wave to and Mr. Courier couldn't make it tonight. So, council. For a motion to appoint planning commissioners, because there's plenty of planning work to do.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Moulton.
I move to approve the appointments of Luke Courier and Mike Mills for 6-year terms on the Planning Commission through December 31st, 2029.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Moulton, a second by Mr. Fantini to approve Luke Courier and Mike Mills to 6-year terms on the Planning Commission. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right.
Aye.
Thank you very much. And again, thank you to Mr. Curry, Mr. Mills for willing to serve on this commission. A lot of work coming up. Okay, next up is Civil Service Commission, and these are reappointments. And again, appreciate the volunteers willing to continue service on our Civil Service Commission. And I'd like to ask Council's confirmation for the appointments of Jim English, a reappointment for a 3-year term through December 31st, 2026, and John Stables for a reappointment, 3-year term through December 31st, 2026.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. Fantini.
I move to reappoint Jim English and John Stables to the Civil Service Commission for 3-year terms through December 31st, 2026.
Second?
Yeah, motion by Mr. Fantini, a second by Ms. Moulton to reappoint Jim English and John Stables, Civil Service Commission. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Okay, thank you, and again, thanks again for the willingness to volunteer. Next up is public comment, item 4, and any member of the public wish to address council anything that's not on our agenda tonight, and I don't have anybody signed up, but I see a couple of new faces, and I see somebody walking to the podium, so if you could state your name and the city you live in, and we'll give you 3 minutes. And make sure the microphone is on, so touch the base of that.
There we go.
There we go. And your
Right.
name and the city you live in.
My name is Alan Bush, and I live at 6628 West Shore Drive in Anacortes. Well, not really. It's on Guaymas Island. I'm a third-generation Guaymas Islander, and I'm a member of the Guaymas Island Planning Advisory Committee and the Guaymas Island Ferry Committee. My mother taught school out at Fidalgo, and my father is a retired Anacortes longshoreman. I'm here to talk about the new $30 million electric ferry. More specifically, the impact at the intersection of 6th and I. 6th and I has been the Guaymas Ferry Dock for 60 years and the state ferry dock before that. After getting over the expensive sticker shock of $30 million, we as islanders are concerned with ferry ridership changing their habits, which will impact the neighborhood surrounding 6th and I. The dock modifications accommodate the immense electrical infrastructure, and it will force about 45 cars to overnight park in front of people's homes. And due to the battery storage footprint, eliminate unloading and loading zones on the dock and displace ADA parking, as well as a Skagit Transit turnaround on the dock. It would be our hope to retain, if not enhance, these transportation connections to help alleviate congestion and provide alternatives to parking in residential communities surrounding 6th and I. Currently, there are, on average, 379,000 passengers annually through that intersection, and around 180,000 cars, vehicles. As a member of Guaymas Island Planning Advisory Committee and Guaymas Island Ferry Committee, we plan to host a meeting with Skagit Transit sometime in February, and we hope you would attend. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, anybody else wish to address the council? And checking online, and I don't have anybody. Okay, we will move on to item 5, which is consent agenda items A through C. Council.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
I move approval of consent agenda items A through C.
Second?
Okay, a motion by Mr. McDougall, second by Ms. Moulton to approve consent agenda items A through C. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. We're on to item 6, which is other business. This is Resolution 3143, authorizing execution of tourism promotion fund contracts by and between the City of Anacortes and recipient agencies for 2024. This is an action item, and Mr. Coleman will be presenting. Mr. Coleman.
Good evening, Mayor, Council, members of the public. In your packet, you have an agenda bill and resolution and LTAC application information and information about the hours of the Visitor Information Center and the the 2023 to 2028 Tourism Promotion Plan that Council recently adopted and describes the methodology by which the LTAC awards are reviewed and given. So hopefully we included in the resolution the LTAC committee's recommendations for awarding funds for 27 LTAC applications. There was a total of 35 applications submitted. 6 were not recommended for approval, and I can, if you have questions about which ones those were, I can identify those for you. Another 15 out of the 27 that were recommended for less than the amount requested. And 2 are still under review. Those are the event tents, and so only one of those would be funded anyway. So in total, this year we had a pretty astounding amount of requests. There was $1,032,722 worth of requests applied for this year. As you can see from the memo, the LTAC committee is recommended funding for $649,725. 135,000 of that is for capital funding, and as described in the memo, there's 2 types of LTAC awards. One is for operations, so that would be, like promotions and funding events and activities, and the other is for capital. So that's something that might be a physical, permanent type of installation, such as one of the 2 examples of the capital is money for design of a depot pavilion for the farmers market and other use, and another recommendation of $75,000 for Anacortes Rotary Viewpoint at Cap Sani. Again, those are permanent facilities, so that those are counted as capital. And we have in the tourism promotion plan a criteria by which we hold back 25% of the annual LTAC funds and earmark those for capital. So we've been saving capital funds for future use of some large type investment. That's what, from those capital funds that we've been earmarking, is where we intend to take the event tent money from also. And also potentially future funding for a permanent event center if one should come to fruition and make a request. So that's sort of the intent of the capital funding. I'd like to acknowledge there were a couple of typos that were in the original resolution that was sent to the council, and those have been corrected. One was, just want to clarify, the Tulip Festival had requested $2,500 in funding, and LTAC recommended the full $2,500. Elves Night Out had requested $2,850, and those LTAC recommended that full approval of $2,850. There was a typo that said that the Anacortes Arts Festival was recommended $15,000, but it was actually just 5,000. They only requested 5,000, so you probably saw that and thought, okay, there's something wrong here, and there was, so sorry about that. We fixed it. And so the total number at the bottom for all the recommended funding thus far is $649,725. So that was corrected in the resolution also. I think that's all I wanted to point out to the council. I know there was a lot of questions, and there always are, on LTAC. I tried to hit as much of the high points and give you as much information as possible in the memo that the agenda bill. But I think the theme of what I wanted to talk about was there was a lot of requests this year, and LTAC did try to reduce the amount, and we've heard some grumblings of people that were disappointed that they didn't get as much as they had requested, but there was a lot of requests, and so they are still recommending to spend a lot of money. However, they also cut a lot, so that's how we got to where we are today. So if you have any questions, I'll try to field them for you.
All right, yeah, and of course the package it's large because it has all those applications with all the back material. So questions for Mr. Coleman?
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleland?
I know you touched on it, but I just want to have it perfectly clear. So the amount of dollars that are collected each year, we've already pulled out the 25% to save for a capital project, some future capital project from the 2023 collection. Is that correct? No.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that. We don't have a special fund dedicated, like taking that 25% and putting it into a dedicated capital fund that can't be touched. But we just kind of keep track of the figures and use a 25% figure to know that every year 25% equals this amount, and that's how we've been keeping track of that fund.
Okay, so then I guess my question is, the two capital projects that have been included in this, is that part of the 25%? Is it being taken out of the capital?
Yes, that would be taken out of that capital that is.
And how much are we expecting to kind of preserve for 2023? Because I didn't see that number here anywhere.
So in 2023, we spent a modest amount in capital. It was the handrails in a restroom.
I'm just, from the amount collected, how much are we trying to kind of earmark for a capital project?
No,
Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, go ahead. Finance Director's chomping at the bit to jump in and help you out, Mr. Coleman.
If I may, thank you. This was actually a project I was hoping to get done in 2023, which I did not, but I'm looking forward to 2024 and working with the Lodging Tax Advisory Committee to try and actually establish those accounting funds that would make it more clear to everybody how much capital we have set aside and how much in regular operating cash is left. So there's, at this point, there is roughly, and keeping in mind the open period for 2023 is still a couple weeks out, but we have about 1.5 million in cash in total in lodging tax. And if you go back and do the calculations of 25% of those revenues every year, that works out to about 900,000 in capital cash that would be set aside, and about 600,000 left in non-encumbered cash that could be used for other things, including capital, but could also be used for operating. But that roughly 900,000 would be encumbered for capital only, or restricted.
Mayor
So
Miller.
then, how much?
I'll let Ms. Cleland go.
How much did we collect this last year?
It was, I think it was about 550,000 is what we collected in 2023. Yeah.
Mr. Walters?
If I understand the policy and the tourism promotion plan, our goal is to each year reserve $25,000. So when you say $900,000 would be encumbered, that's the accumulation of 25% over the last several years.
Yes, exactly. So I think my calculation went back to 2016 when this policy was put into place.
Yes. But also we are being asked to approve $650,000 worth of funding this year. Of that, 150 so far is capital, right? So then we're talking about $400,000 in the non-capital side, and 150 of that 650 is about 25%, a little bit less. So all of that, though, will be spent from revenue that comes in during 2024, right? So we still have the 1.5 or 1.6, whatever you said, in cash and fund balance.
Yes, right.
A little bit less because the year's not,
Yeah.
year end hasn't been done, but
Right.
yeah, okay.
Mayor Miller,
Mr. McDougall.
really quickly, I got a text from Mr. Young, who is remote and having some internet connection issues. So it looks like he may be coming back on.
I see him. Maybe you could try it without video.
Yeah.
That sometimes helps.
Well, I keep, forgive me, Mayor,
Yeah.
and thank you, Bruce. Just quickly before my internet access
Yeah, it
goes
sounds
out.
like he's in a spot where internet is kind of intermittent or troublesome.
Yep. We can hear you,
So
Mr.
he'll
Young.
join as he can.
Yes, if you can hear me, what I'm hoping to point out is just that we did have a lot of requests coming in, and it was just tremendous. But we did the best that we could in order to distribute the funds as equitably as possible, but also at the same time to the greater benefit of the city as a whole. And yes, to answer Ms. Cleveland McGrath's questions, as well as Mr. Walter's questions, part of the goal of the committee was to try to establish a baseline of funds. And we've adhered to that as hard as we could. We really did. And the goal was to preserve funds for a future, capital project that we may be interested in. And so, during my tenure as head of the committee, we adhered to that. And I just hope that it answers some of the questions. I apologize for not being there, but I am in a remote location, so I will try to answer any questions that you guys may have for me.
I appreciate that, Mr. Young, and yes, a reminder for the public that Mr. Young did chair the LTAC committee. All right, other questions?
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini.
So I just had a question about a couple of the goals that are listed in the tourism promotion strategic plan and how we are kind of making sure those are happening. So for instance, in goal 7E and 7F, it talks about continuing support of events that contribute to local culture, and then 7F talks about weaning off events that should be able to support themselves, accept events that could become much greater. And then that kind of leads in with goal 4, talking about accountability and making sure that that there's a template for a reporting form, handout of tracking, requiring presentation of reporting metrics. And I know that we have a lot of these events that have received these funds last year and probably years before that. And I'm just curious how we are reporting I saw a lot of numbers and this many people came and that many people came and they came from this far away. Are these just numbers that are being given by the different groups, or is there an actual measuring of this somehow?
Provided by the applicants, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Mayor Miller?
Mr. Young.
Yes, just to elaborate a little bit further on Mr. Fantini's question. Yes, part of what we've done is that, quite honestly, we have a new director, and new staff that really stepped in and in a great way and have done a tremendous job. And part of that is that not only did we do that, we began to evaluate how we were going about it, the requirements, and we also set a parameter of timelines because at one point, we were trying to help the community, but the timeline for application was a little less strenuous than it is right now. And so what we are trying to do now is to add in those baked in items. I mean, part of it is an honor system, but part of it is still the reality of having measured actions that are taken. And, we also have our people on the ground. So, we found that people are pretty much honest about it. But for those new people who are projecting large numbers, as many do for their first event, what we've done so far is that we've limited the amount of resources if they were approved, and then pending uh, any additional applications they make, the proof of that. With each application that is approved, there's a reporting that comes back to us. And so we're working on that now. But I do say for the future chair of the committee that I think that those things were implemented, but I think that there needs to be a deeper evaluation of how we can do that and yet be fair to the very people that are there. So, yes, we've made some changes, and yes, we hear you loud and clear. Those are the things that we've attempted to do with everything we have. Thank you.
Miller?
Mr. Walters?
To add on to that a little bit, in the past, some events have tried to capture real data. So for example, if a registration form were required for the event, they would ask, are you staying in Anacortes? Are you traveling from wherever, that kind of thing. So that they would get self-reported, but still, some real data. And then other events, like the fireworks show reports overall attendance of 25,000. I don't know where that number came from, and how would you measure it? So some events lend themselves to measurement and some don't, but there is some real data in some of these applications.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
I have two applications I'd like to talk about. One is the Visitors Information Center, and I see the chamber applied for about $81,000 and were granted 75. There were just a couple of line items that jumped out at me in their proposal. One of these I brought up last year. It was the line item for the ACFL maps at $1,400, which I believe the chamber sells, just like the Watermark Book Company does, and just like Skagit Cycle Center does. So that may have come out of the $6,000 that were not granted, but that's the kind of thing that I would like to not be there next year. Also, there's a double, I believe it's a double line item for Julie's vest cleaning. It's there twice for $2,200 in a year. And I understand that this is, I'm sure it's a necessary expense, but I don't know that it should be in there twice. So between those two things, it's $3,600, and that's, I don't know if you can speak to why the committee decided to take 6,000 out. I would consider those two items to be part of that, but I don't know if you want to give me a brief description of why the committee. And if you don't, that's okay too. I just wanted to call those out.
I don't recall a line-by-line discussion of the cleaning. The 2,200 that you mentioned was perhaps in there twice. So I don't have any background as to whether that's they're putting it in there twice, or maybe it's like a twice occurring bill. I don't have any background.
It looks like Ms. Snyder might have something to add.
And while she's coming up to add something, and just keep in mind that the city doesn't pay anything out until we're invoiced with it. So we don't preload this money out. They've got to show an invoice. Ms. Snyder.
Hi, thank you, Mayor. The two cleaning invoices, one is for the visitor center proper and one is for the restrooms on their line items. And they did discuss the brochures being sold, and so that is part of the reason of the reduction. And then I did want to answer for Mr. Fantini on the reporting. In our contracts, when we do grant funding, they are required to report on an addendum B, and I have to send all of the reporting to the JLARC committee at Washington State, and there are checkboxes for the applicants to tell us how they came up with their estimates, whether it's an estimate or an accurate one, but they are not allowed to be, we don't fund them until we get that addendum B from them, so we keep pretty careful track.
Thank you. My second question is about the depot capital project for $60,000, and I know that there are two additional proposals that are still being vetted for events tents, one at the depot and one at the Majestic. So I don't know what the status of those are, but it seems to me that the $60,000 is to figure out a permanent structure at the depot.
No. I mean, it is for a permanent structure, but not an event center. It's for, I don't know if John wants if John Lunsford wants to describe it in detail since he happens to be here, but it's for the design of a permanent structure at the depot that is not intended as an event center.
Mayor Miller, Council, ladies and gentlemen, Ms. Moulton. So when we discussed the events structure at the Depot Plaza earlier this year, adding it to the CFP so we go out for the grant with the county, and the council did not want to follow that path. So when we looked back and then talked to the farmers market and others about could we talk to some architectural firms in town and develop something that would be in harmony with the Depot master plan, and could we perhaps expand the plaza in some way to allow more room at the farmers market, or could we put elements on the plaza or extension of the plaza to assist the farmers market to allow them to expand? So this is more around the market and their expansion, and it could have some other benefits to the community in that regard, but it's not for an events tent or event structure in that regard. Is that helpful information? Okay, thank you.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
To follow up on that, don't go too far. Can you give us some flavor of that? So first of all, it's about the farmers market. It's not about events, but it's about the farmers market. The Madrona Grove is verboten. So where does the plaza expand to? And what is the structure that you assumedly think is possible? What does that possibly look like? Because that is what we always had trouble with. What can you build there that would be consistent with the depot and its uses?
Great question. So we would like to work with architectural firms to help us create that vision and then bring it back to you all in some form. So your answer for your first question is, so you have a lot, so we just cleaned up some of the railroad tracks and got the creosote out south of the Maritime Heritage Center. So that's about 9,000 square feet. So it's sizable. So if you went to the bow of the Preston, I believe, I remember my commercial fishing days, and I have a Navy man in front of me. So I went to the bow. If you go to the bow of the Preston, and in that area, excluding Altair Americas, you could do some things in there that would allow you some room for an extension of the plaza, perhaps, in the form that it is now, or some other kinds of structures that would allow you there to give us space for more community events and expansion of the market. So especially with the port doing what they're doing across the street, it wouldn't be a nice enhancement, we think, for the depot area, and potentially working with the master plan that was created in '06. So that's one area that we've looked at. We have no intention of going into the Madrona Grove, other than just to keep it as it is and make improvements if we can for the habitat, but we don't expect to expand in that zone. Is that helpful?
Well, so that's helpful. That doesn't inform what we'd be spending the $60,000 on, because expanding the plaza we don't need $60,000 worth of design for that, right?
Well, so we may not spend the 60. Our desire is to look at if we wanted to go out for different, what we heard from council at the time earlier this year was you didn't have a visual of what we would like to do. So if we could talk to architectural firms and hire them and go out for RFQ and bring them in and then have them do that, could they do that under 60? Quite possibly, but we don't, as the mayor said, we won't spend it all just to spend it. We would like to give you a rendering of a good community plan and let the community look at that with you so that we could have it before you in a way that was more presentable and a clearer view of what we wouldn't do there.
And you've said that the objective is not event center, but what is the objective?
The objective is to enhance the community space down there in a way that the market could use it and the community could use it. So for events, where, you know, say, if it's just for example, the group that comes in June, Race Week, thank you. Race Week, they are too big, but they would like to use it. So we try to stack them in the plaza area, but it's not, it doesn't work for them. So if we could expand the plaza and allow the market to expand itself, that would help them, you know, with utilities and such within. And then you could have events like Race Week and other events could spill over into that area. Say that you did it south of the Maritime Heritage Center. That's the kind of events we see happening there. Market use on Saturdays, perhaps expanded market use in the future. You could put some small structures there that would benefit the market if that's what they saw as a need. You know, we would work with the Farmers Market Board. And then those are the things that we see architects helping us kind of display for you and the public to see.
South of Maritime Heritage and east of the Preston?
Correct.
Okay. And so you have not mentioned something that had come up before, which is the construction of a permanent stage.
That stage could be, if you did this, you could put that on the south end of the Maritime Heritage Center because there's a ramp that would feed it. That could be part of the design that we would ask the architects to help us do. We had talked about doing that in the Madrona Grove. You could do that there. That would benefit the market. So those are the kinds of things we'd like to feel. Is it makes sense to go on the edge of the Madrona Grove on the east side of the existing plaza? Or would it make more sense to go on the south end of the Maritime Heritage Center and put a stage there that was covered and could be used for both museum purposes and market purposes? So those are the things that we would look at in this kind of, this funny to help us with our planning and renderings by architectural firms.
Okay. I understand that we are not authorized under the statute to reduce the amount of money for one of these awards, just to delete recipients. But it just seems like $60,000 isn't required. Like anywhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 isn't required for what you're describing?
I don't know. I haven't gone out yet for the RFQ.
Okay.
Mayor Miller?
Oh, Mr. Young.
Thank you. No, just, I think that the council is posing very valid questions, about how best to use those dollars that are entrusted to us. And with the comments from last year, recognizing that there were comments about, just concerns about the depot itself and how and best we could use this money toward a greater good. Remembering that we were also dealing with the urgency of trying to solve a problem for the community with the closing of the transit shed. But to the point about what does it look like, the whole reason that the LTAC thought that this was a worthy look was simply just everything would be on the table. There, those concerns would become before council and the public, the needs that we are attempting to address, where, how, all of those comes after a full investigation to look and see what might be some proposals that we can bring forward to the public and, of course, council to try to come up with a solution that works for all. I hear the questions that you're posing, Mr. Walters, as well as I'm sure other members of council. Those are valid questions. But the only way we're going to get there is if we allow some resources to go toward investigating this and coming up with some designs that we can narrow down that best serves the public. And that was the reason that the LTAC committee granted this request and the hope for going forward, because it will be something that we believe will be used. Where it will be determined by its best use, the design, and of course, council's approval, as well as the public. Thank you.
Any other questions for Mr. Coleman or
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Fantini?
I have a question about and again, just trying to figure this all out, the 2024 Experience Anacortes budget proposal from the chamber. It's the largest item on here, and it looks like a lot of it is marketing. Does all of that 242 or 225,000 that's being awarded go towards the marketing? Is that
So
how I'm
mostly
reading that?
marketing, but also I think some of that is like downtown decoration and events that happen in town, but largely marketing, which is obviously really important. They gave a presentation about how they do their marketing, using geofencing and social media advertisements in publications in regional, including British Columbia and at the SeaTac airport. And so that's where a lot of the marketing goes, as well as some of the events in town that the chamber does.
So like
putting
the
up
beer on the pier
wreaths.
stuff, that's kind of, is that also funded through the LTAC funding?
Sorry?
No, that's not funded through the LTAC funding, like beer on the pier, Uncorked, those types of things. It's mostly just the advertising to bring people here.
Well, I'll jump in here
I don't recall if.
because it's in the packet.
It is in the packet.
And for Beer on the Pier, for example, Skagit Publishing, $2,000. So
Yeah.
they've lined out the areas that they're spending their marketing dollars on.
It would definitely be for marketing. I'm just not sure if it goes towards like any of the operations of Beer on the Pier. I thought that's what you were asking.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleland?
I mean, I'm reading it, and if I'm reading it correctly, it looks like administration portion of marketing director salary, benefits, and professional development is $25,000. I also noticed that it still has Uncorked for $6,000, and that event is not happening. I mean, I know we're only supporting about 44% of their overall budget, but yeah, there's more to it than I think just marketing.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
I might find something in the packet here to quibble with, maybe for several of these, but overall, I think that this is a fine list of recommendations with maybe two exceptions. I think we ought to approve the resolution with two deletions. And that one, if we are to act tonight, I think we should approve the resolution with two deletions. One would be the Depot Pavilion, because I think that needs more definition, and we could come back and we could do that mid-year even, because we've got this money set aside. But before we spend that money, or rather before we authorize $60,000 for that, I think we should know a little bit more about quite what it is we're talking about, because the plaza itself just it doesn't rise to that level of expense. And then the other one is the Anacortes Rotary Viewpoint at Capsana. I think that one should come back to us in a special presentation, because this council has not been briefed on that project at all. And I know it's somewhat controversial. I think that some of that controversy is mitigated by the fact that we weren't spending public money on it, except that this would spend some public money on it, which I don't know that we all anticipated. So I would suggest that we strike that one for now, and then invite Rotary to come in, or Rotary or Parks, because Parks is the applicant for that project, to come back and fully brief us on the project and give an opportunity for the public to hear about it. I know that there was an open house, I guess, but this would be on TV, so that we can fully vet it before authorizing it.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
I do feel like there are a lot of questions about I'm thinking about that depot plan and what is it? I'd like to look at it more on the ground, like how big's the space? It's also going to be potentially separate from the actual, if it has the Maritime Museum between it and the Preston between the two sections. Like, I do feel like we need to maybe explore that more publicly. And the Capsana viewpoint, it looks beautiful, and they've raised $400,000 for it already, and they've already done remarkable work there. But I do feel like it could bear more discussion publicly and with council, because we haven't had a presentation about it, and I don't think that that would necessarily really slow things down terribly, and we would just get more information I think that we might all be comfortable with.
That almost sounded like a motion and a second with those items. And
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters.
And if we pulled those two items from this resolution, we would be pulling the two capital items. So then we could have a more holistic discussion about the capital items. And I don't consider myself opposed to the Rotary viewpoint. I mean, Rotary checked in with us sort of very early on in the process, and what I think they have described there looks okay to me, but all I've seen are the renderings that are on the website and in the packet. So I would like to have more of an investigation of that, more of a presentation and discussion about that before we authorize it. So I would move that we approve the resolution as presented with two deletions, and those two being the Rotary Viewpoint and the Depot Pavilion.
Second?
Okay, a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Moulton to approve resolution number 3143 with the exception of item number 18 and 20, the Anacortes Rotary Viewpoint and Depot Pavilion concept design. Any additional discussion?
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland McGrath.
Yeah, the Depot Pavilion, I think, needs more discussion, especially in regards to how the redesign of that intersection is going to go. I think that's got to be factored in. And I agree, I would like to see more information about what are the purpose of that and the programming of that additional space would look like, not necessarily what the physical space would look like, but how what our goals are to use it differently. And maybe that's going to be kind of done in parallel with, well, let's go look at the space and see what's possible. And then the Rotary Viewpoint, I think, is a fantastic project, but with both projects, since it is capital funds and capital projects, I think we have to have a larger discussion of taking out that amount of money, $135,000, if I'm doing my math correctly, that won't be used towards some kind of event space. I think our goal has been, and we know more now than ever, that we need some event space, and we need to be, while these projects are fantastic or sound like there's a lot of potential for them, we need to be really aware of what we could be giving up. And I know $135,000 isn't a lot of money, but it still goes a long way. And so I would tend to agree with removing those two capital projects at this time.
Okay. Thank you. Okay, still a motion, and it certainly doesn't preclude the applicants for reapplying and providing that information in the future. So a motion by Mr. Walters and a second by Ms. Moulton to approve resolution 3143 with the deletion of 18 and 20.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters.
And to be clear, I guess I consider the resolution to not have the effect of making these applicants reapply, but that we defer action on those two until later.
Thank you for the clarification. Mr. Hoagland, you ready to take the vote on the, oh, sorry.
Just a point of clarification.
Okay.
After striking those two amounts, I want to point out that the recommended award total drops by $135,000 to $514,725, just for the math on this to look accurate.
Thank you for clarifying that. Staff will do the math properly after that. Mr. Hoagland. Oh,
Mayor Miller.
Ms. Cleveland.
So if we're spending 514,000 through this, and am I wrong that we collected 523,000 in 2023? Mr. Hoagland?
Mr. Hoagland.
That sounds right.
So then where is our 25% that we wanted to reserve for capital projects in the future from that year? Where is that coming from?
So I know it can be confusing to follow the accounting. So the awards that you're approving tonight for 2024, we will use the revenues collected in 2024 to fund the majority of those. If there's a measure of funding that needs to be made up, that'll come out of cash reserves. When we were talking about this earlier, in rough numbers, we're talking about 600,000 in non-restricted monies and about 900,000 in restricted capital monies. So that's where that difference would come from, those 600,000 in non-restricted monies, if additional funds were needed on top of the revenues collected next year. If I understood your question, please.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that the amount of LTAC dollars we're collecting in 2023, we're only spending 75% of it on operating projects. Is that correct? And where was
in 2024?
Or in 2024?
Yeah. That's
because it seems like we're spending more than that.
Yeah, right, and that's where, going back to the accounting of the restricted capital cash that's been set aside and the non-restricted money that's still sitting there. So that non-restricted money is available for use to help fund these projects if enough revenue doesn't come in next year to cover those costs.
Yeah, and just a reminder for the public, it's predicted revenue, so
Yeah.
that's how we do this, just like we do all of our budgeting. So.
Yeah, I'm still confused though. Are we actually reserving 25% of our projected, or are we not?
Mayor Miller.
For 2024.
Mr. Walters?
I did some math here. So if we are projected to spend 650K, but now you're saying we would spend less, right? We would 650 minus the 135, so that's 515. So if we're bringing in 650, because that's the projected revenue amount, then 75% of that is 487, and we're about to authorize 515. So we're authorizing more than the 75% by a little bit, not a whole lot.
I'll let Mr. Hoagland and then Mr. Coleman, I think, Mr. Hoagland or Mr. Coleman?
Yeah, so that's, we do have cash reserves set aside that are eligible to be used to make up that funding gap. So that's where that additional revenue would come from.
Mayor Miller?
Ms. Moulton?
So to follow up on that, so presumably then we had saved in the past more than 25% every year. So we have a little extra.
Yes, that's, thank you. That's
okay.
a nice way of putting it. Yes, that's exactly right.
Well, thanks, you led me there.
Was that where you were going to weigh in, Mr. Coleman, on that one?
I was going to point out in the agenda bill, it talks about our projected revenue. I think it's 559 in 2024, and then it breaks it down how much of that would be capital and how much of that would be operational. And clearly, we're spending more operational than we anticipate to collect in 2025. But Mr. Hoagland was explaining.
And that's different from.
So I don't know if this helps. In a couple of weeks, I'll be coming back with the year-end finance update, and I'd be happy to spend more time on the lodging tax section to make sure that it's clear the money that we have collected, that we're spending, that we're planning on spending in the future.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Walters?
So then the delta, if that projection turns out to be right, then the delta is more like $100,000 that we're spending over our 75% allocation. But the only option we have as council under the statute is to delete people, we can't impose like a 10% cut across the board or something like that. So our only option is to delete recipients from the list. So what would we do?
Well, Mayor Miller?
Ms. Cleland?
Well, I imagine, and correct me if I'm wrong, one option would be that we say we want to hold to the 75% towards operations and say, please go back and figure out how to save $100,000 towards capital. Is that not how we could handle it?
I think that's exactly right. I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. That's exactly right. You would have to kick this back to committee, and then they would have to do that work to meet the council's expectations.
Mayor Miller?
Mr. Walters?
I concur with that. However, that I think will create some uncertainty in the budgets of these organizations for 2024. I mean, we have to reappoint an LTAC committee before we can hold that meeting. So I would not recommend that. I would recommend spending an extra $100,000, even though it's above our policy goal, which is just a goal, rather than doing that, unless there's one particular one you would like to strike to get us down, or a couple. I mean, because most of these allocations are relatively small. Some maybe are larger than I would like and might quibble with, but you either have to knock off a couple of big ones or a whole bunch of them to get to 100,000.
And I'll remind the council there's a motion and a second on the floor.
Mayor Miller.
Mr. Fantini.
Sorry. Do we know how much is in that cash reserves fund that we can pull? If we've not spent it in previous years for LTAC, do we know, is that the 1.4 million or is that?
The 1.5
Yes.
the 1.5 is the total, including the money that's been restricted for capital. So it's about 600,000 that's left that's not restricted.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Young, were you trying to?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor Miller. Again, just as a reminder to council, part of the capital projects and the fund itself, we set aside X amount of dollars, the 25%. But the 25% was really more of a guide. And what we did as a committee was codify the amount of money we were going to move toward a permanent projects, bigger capital projects. So I would say, though, that a lot of thought went into these projects that we were authorizing in this sense and bringing forward to council. It wasn't an arbitrary thought process. And then again, 75% is the goal. And when we looked at the amount of money that we already had in the account, we thought that in this case, because of the urgency of what we felt we were dealing with, not only by way of the depot, but by way of an event center space and everything else associated with it, we just felt that it was a good use of public dollars. And even to answer your question, Ms. Cleland McGrath, our financial director went to great lengths to try to explain it to us, and it is still confusing, but at the end of the day, what we did accomplish was that we felt that this was a great use of funds. We felt that it would benefit our city as a whole, and we tried to be as frugal as possible. Whether or not you may agree with our choice of items, it was just what we could put forward. And that 75% wasn't something that we absolutely had to do every time, although we did it in prior years. It was just that this year, we felt that given the number of requests and the challenges, that this was a great use of.
Okay, I think we got most of that. Okay, so there's still a motion and a second on the floor. 3143, removing 18 and 20. Mr. Hoagland, would you take the vote, please?
Mr. Young?
No.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall,
Yes.
Ms. Hubick,
Yes.
Mr. Fantini.
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Good discussion, and we're on to item 6B, which is Resolution 3144, appointment of council members to committees for 2024. This is an action item, and should I give it right to Ms. Moulton, Mayor Pro Tem?
Thank you, Mayor Miller. Well, as the new Mayor Pro Tem, every 2 years, the new Mayor Pro Tem assigns committee members to council committees, most of which have 3 council members per committee, because if we had 4, that would be a violation of the Open Public Meetings Act. So the first thing that I did was talk to all the council members to ask what they most preferred, which committees they would like most to be on. And fortunately for me, mostly they were different, so it wasn't a very hard job, and for that I am grateful. So what is on the resolution here are the committee assignments that all the council members are aware of. And there's one correction I'd like to make. It's to the Economic Development Committee. This is a misprint. It says Anthony Young, Bruce McDougall, and Christine Cleland McGrath. It really will be Anthony Young, Bruce McDougall, and Amanda Hubick. And other than that, everything here looks good to me, and looking forward to all this good committee work we're going to do this year.
Okay, any questions, council? All right, any motions?
Mayor Miller,
Ms. Cleland McGrath.
I move to adopt Resolution 3144, confirming the committee appointments proposed by the Mayor Pro Tem with the noted change.
Second.
Okay, a motion by Ms. Cleland McGrath, a second by Ms. Hubick to approve Resolution 3144 with the change to economic development, substituting Christine Cleland McGrath with Amanda Hubick. Any additional discussion? Mr. Hoagland.
Mr. Walters?
Yes.
Ms. Cleland McGrath?
Yes.
Ms. Moulton?
Yes.
Mr. McDougall?
Yes.
Ms. Hubick?
Yes.
Mr. Fantini?
Yes.
Mr. Young?
Yes.
Motion carries.
Okay, thank you. Being no further business before the council, I will adjourn the meeting. Have a good night.